Today is week 3 of the awesome series, Jesus is King.
Well, hey there to our online hub of Elevate Church. Great to have you with us. Just before I begin this message, week 3 of Jesus is King, I just need to let you know, for those of you joining us for the first time, we're currently living in a construction site. We're having some extensions done to our house about 2 meters that way. So we're very likely going to have be joined by some background notes of, I believe today is circular saws and hammers. So there's that. Hey, one of the breakout worship songs over the last 2 years is a song by Elevation Worship and called Here Again. And it's a song that's we at Elevate still have in our rotation. And let me just read the first verse, just the beginning of that song. The lyric is, "Can't go back to the beginning, can't control what tomorrow will bring. But I know here in the middle is the place where you promised to be." Now, I didn't write the song, but my understanding of sort of the vibe of it, the big idea around that, particularly around that part of the lyric, is this idea that we encounter circumstances and we find ourselves inevitably in seasons from time to time which are maybe less than ideal, maybe less than God's best. And in those times, we can feel abandoned, we can feel trapped. And I spoke about some of that last week. Things like maybe you've lost your job, maybe relationship breakdown, health issue, financial pressure, things that aren't necessarily what we would consider to be ideal, not necessarily things that we hoped for, prayed for, expected, if you certainly expected the best. And in those circumstances and in those seasons, it's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to have our patience tested. And it's easy for our attitude to actually be dragged down with the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And whilst, as I said, I think this song speaks to circumstances and seasons, the reality is if we zoom out, we're always in the middle. We're always in the middle of this cosmic journey that God's got us on. We're always living between, and let me help you visualize it. We're always living between the already, the things that God has done, and the not yet, the things that God will do, the things that God's promised to do. And we're in the middle, where you are here, the now. And that's more of a long arc perspective than just a set of circumstances or a season that we find ourselves in. And whether it's in the short arc or whether it's in the long arc of finding ourselves in the middle, and I know that we can't control everything while we're in the middle. Having said that, there is some things that we can control, and I want to speak to them today. So if you've got your Bible app, open that up and open it to Colossians chapter 3. Now, this is a letter that Paul, one of the heavyweights of the early church, wrote to Jesus followers in a place called Colossae. And for the 3 weeks, this being week 3 of our series, Jesus is King, we've actually been walking through some of the slices of what Paul wrote to that church. In week 1, our great friend Steve Hall talked about Jesus is King of my life and dropped us into something that Paul wrote in what's now chapter 1 of this letter. Last week, I talked about Jesus is King of my circumstances and dropped us into some slices from chapter 2. So today I want to drop into chapter 3 of this very same letter that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae. Let me start us off in verse 1. So Paul wrote to them, "So if you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, act like it." Before Paul even gets going in this part of his letter, he points to the already. He points to the reality that as Jesus followers, and again, this is an if question, if you're a Jesus follower, and if you are, then having become a Jesus follower.
Okay, I found this on the web for...
That was Siri, everybody. She's a little pesky sometimes. If you're a Jesus follower, if you've put your trust in Jesus, if you have asked him to not be king of other things, but to actually be king of your life, then in that moment, a great exchange happens. In that moment, a great miracle happens, that your old self, that your sin-dominated self was actually dead, became dead, and a new life was born, a resurrected life was born, and we were given a new name, a new identity, a new hope, a new relationship with God that we didn't have before. And this resurrection that takes place. This is why we at Elevate and many other leaders around the world continually come back and bang the drum that Jesus didn't come to make bad people good, although there ought to be some positive moral implications of following Jesus. But Jesus didn't, first and foremost, come to make bad people good. He came to raise dead people to life. And then Paul says to the people who have experienced this resurrection, and that's you and me if you're a follower of Jesus, that if you're serious about living this resurrected life with Christ, act like it. And look, I don't know if Paul was giving them a bit of a finger wag. We don't have access to all of that information. But it certainly points to, and he certainly points to, there being some lifestyle implications of us becoming followers of Jesus. There are some lifestyle implications of us being resurrected, that actually, having been resurrected, we should be living differently from people who are not yet followers of Jesus. We should be demonstrating a life and a power and a set of priorities that are different from people that aren't yet followers of Jesus. We should be paying attention to things that are different from people who are followers of Jesus. We have access to things that people who are followers of Jesus don't have access to. Is that too much? So Paul starts with the already, and then he moves into the now. Pursue the things over which Christ presides. Don't shuffle along, eyes to the ground, absorbed with the things right in front of you. No, look up and be alert to what's going on around Christ. That's where the action is. See things from his perspective. Now, a couple of years ago, when we first moved into our house, before it was a construction zone, we had a shed out the back, and I had various things stored there, laundry supplies, garden tools, etc. And I found myself initially pondering getting a torch, buying a torch. And so I was online researching torches. You know, I didn't want to spend too much, but I didn't want to get something that wasn't adequate. And so I'm kind of getting in, taking a deep dive into torches. And then I remember just one day face palming myself because I remembered that I actually have a torch within arm's reach of me most hours of the day. You might know it as a phone, an iPhone, an Android phone, but actually the reality is it's not a phone. I mean, yes, it makes phone calls, but really it's more of a technological Swiss Army knife. And one of the things that this technological Swiss Army knife does is on the back, there's a torch. And actually it's pretty good. So I didn't buy a torch. I simply have since that moment, since that realization, I've used my phone when I've needed to go to the shed before the sun rises or after the sun sets. And here's a pro tip if you haven't used a torch in a while. You only see what you focus on. Deep, I know. When it comes to looking for things that are obscured or obstructed, you will only see what you focus the light on. You will only see what you focus the torch on. And when you choose to focus on those things, it's not that they suddenly appear. They were always there. It's just now that you're able to see them, whereas before you couldn't see them. And so Paul's instruction to us has got nothing to do with changing our circumstances, has nothing to do with ejecting us out of the middle. It's actually to say, he's actually saying in the middle, in the now, focus on different things than you did before you became a follower of Jesus. And when you do, you'll see things differently. So here's two things that I want to pick up on.
Welcome.
Siri again. Two things that I want to encourage us to focus on that I am confident will change our perspective while we're living in the middle. The first one, it's almost a no-brainer. Focus on God. Duh. Focus on God. And one of the things that is probably the most accessible when it comes to focusing on God is start with the already. Start with remembering, reminding yourself, revisiting, recalling the things that God has already done. And just in that shift of focus, rather than just being focused on the middle, just being focused on the now, I think a pro tip is to start by focusing on what God's already done, and know that the God that has done already these things is also capable of moving in the now. And by the way, we'll get on to talking about the not yet. So let me give you a leg up. And this isn't even whether I know you or not personally, or know your story, or know your circumstances. This is if you're a follower of Jesus, then here are some things that are true of you that God's already done for you. Let me give you a leg up. Here they are. God has forgiven you and me. God has given you a new life. God has filled you with His Spirit. God has promised to never leave you. God has led you. God has strengthened you. And God has put courage in you. Now, all of those things that God has already done, He continues to do. He continues to strengthen you. He continues to put courage in you. He continues to lead you while you're in the middle. So we can focus on God by remembering the already. That same God is present and acting in the now. And that same God has made promises that we will only grab a hold of if we keep pushing through in the middle. And those promises are in the not yet. And some of those promises we're going to experience on this earth. And some of those promises, the not yet, we're not going to experience on this earth. And we'll only realize the fullness of them when we meet Jesus face to face. But the same God is at work in the already, in the now, and promises to be in the not yet. Paul went on to drill into this idea. Your old life is dead. Your new life, which is your real life, even though invisible to spectators, is with Christ in God. He is your life. When Christ, your real life, remember, shows up again on this earth, you'll show up too, the real you, the glorious you. Meanwhile, be content with obscurity like Christ. Focus on God, the already, the now, and the not yet. And then the second pro tip that I want to encourage you to shift your focus on is to focus on good. Focus on God and focus on good. And just like focusing on God, this one I think is super practical. So let me break it down for you. And I want to warn you, this might get a little painful for some of you. One of the ways to focus on good is to focus on good health. Now, I don't want to sound like your mom or your doctor or your personal trainer, but the reality is that studies are coming out one after the other of the connection between our physical health and our mental health. That as we pay closer attention and as we focus on better health, focus on good health, that will actually have a knock-on benefit to our mental health. So one of the ways that you can actually change your attitude in the middle is by focusing on good health. Things like getting better quality and quantity of sleep. I mean, if you live in Western society these days, how little we sleep is kind of like people wear it like a badge of honor. Or how much do you need every night? Or I don't need that much. I need less than. And people like walk around having just a little bit of a one-upmanship competition about who can sleep the least. And yet some people, that it's a problem. And if you were to pay closer attention to focus on better sleep, it will actually have a knock-on benefit to your physical and mental health. Nutrition's another one. And look, I don't want to tell you what you should or shouldn't be eating. You probably already know, by the way. But again, if you want to have a better attitude, if you want to experience more joy and energy in the middle, focus on better nutrition. And the final one is movement. And I say this often, that in Western society, we're kind of moving in the direction of eating like a teenager and moving like a pensioner, even when we're no longer a teenager or not yet a pensioner. This kind of Wall-E reality is becoming true for us. And unfortunately, if that's something that someone chooses to do, eat poorly, move very little, it almost always has some impact on mental health and attitude. So good health, focus on good health. Another slice of focusing on good is focus on good news. Now, you may have heard of this thing. It's called the internet. And courtesy of the internet, we now have access to more news content, literally at our fingertips, than ever in the history of the world. And look, this can be a good thing. You know, we can actually use access to information to be well informed. And by the way, reading Facebook posts and memes, it does not make you well informed. But to do research and to look to experts, you know, we can be well informed. So there's a place for accessing news. However, there is a shift in news content creation and delivery, which is really fueled by trying to get your attention, trying to get the attention of scrollers and people, you know, electronically viewing the news. Headlines like clickbait, publishing organizations focusing on negative and scandal and bad news stories. And those are just as accessible as the good news stories. And if we're not careful, this endless access, literally bottomless access to news, if we're not careful to filter a little and edit a little and triage a little, then it can open us up to the seemingly endless barrage of bad news becoming this reality, becoming this kind of dark cloud that follows us around everywhere. And so I'm a strong proponent of being well informed, and I'm a strong proponent of seeking out good news that will actually remind you that God is in control, that the human heart and human condition, yes, is broken, and yet the light is shining through some of the cracks, and make that decision. And thirdly, in focusing on the good friends. And you know who I'm talking about. Chances are in your life, you've got some people who charge your batteries when you hang around them, and people who drain your batteries when you hang around them. You know, people who charge your batteries, they come in with joy and positivity and encouragement, and they speak life and they speak hope and they speak promise when you're with them, and you walk away from the time that you've spent with them, and you're better for it. You feel like you've plugged yourself into the charger. And there's also a possibility that you have some people in your life that when you walk away from them, you feel like you need a shower. You feel like the battery levels have just been draining while you've been with them. And I'm not necessarily about cutting those people out of your life that drain your batteries. I mean, it could be that God's called you to actually be the one that speaks life into them and causes some change into them. However, if the tide is such that your batteries are drained because of their toxicity and negativity in such a way that they're affecting you more than you're affecting them, they're infecting you more than you're affecting them, then maybe it's time to practicing some social distancing from them, because what they've got is spreading on you and it's causing you to come crashing down. Good health, good news, and good friends. That's some pro tips. Focus on God and focus on good, to help make Jesus king of your attitude.